Andrew is Executive Director for Technical Research at OCLC. And Andrew, we can see your slides. You should be all set to go.
Great, thank you, Todd. And also thank you to Jill for making these logistics so easy for the presenters. Let me get back to my presentation mode. At OCLC, I lead a team of research scientists, architects, and engineers who track library and broader data science trends, and I'm responsible for building some coordination around our R&D strategy at OCLC Research. I will start by saying that the more of these webinars I've attended myself, the more I find that about 10 to 12 minutes is about my average attention span for a single speaker, present company excluded, of course. So I'll do my best to use no more than that and leave plenty of time for Tom to speak as well. In OCLC, our data serves library constituents and library workers in many ways, but I'm going to focus on just two of those today. One blue sky and one brass tacks. Both are focused on the emerging field of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in libraries. This rapidly growing field actually reminds me a lot of what we used to call digital libraries about 25 years ago. No one then knew quite what the standards or best practices for digital library work would be. There was no defined set of skills for library workers. There was a lack of agency in the field that would only later emerge with the Digital Library Federation, ARL, NISO, COSLA, and others. And it took us 25 years to stop saying digital library and start just saying library again. And I think the same will be true of data science in libraries in times to come. But of course, the biggest difference this time around compared to digital libraries is that there are many, many more commercial players in this space with which the library industry will have to contend. So on to the first topic and the research. I have to point out that I'm standing on the shoulders of a giant in this emerging ecosystem. Authored by Thomas Padilla while he was a practitioner, researcher, and residence at OCLC in 2019, Responsible Operations is intended to help chart library community engagement with data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, and was developed in partnership with an advisory group, which you see here on the screen, and a landscape group comprised of more than 70 librarians and professionals from universities, libraries, museums, archives, and other organizations. This research agenda presents an independent set of technical, organizational, and social challenges to be addressed en route to library operationalization of data science, machine learning, and AI. Its 50+ recommendations in 7 areas certainly indicate that the status quo, such as it is, still has major issues. I can't possibly do this work justice in a few minutes, but I think a few of the areas of Padilla's report are worth highlighting for the purposes of this discussion and presentation. So I've cherry-picked from his list of 7 here, but a few minutes, as I said, won't do it justice. So I do encourage folks to take a look at the entire report, but these areas I thought might be of particular interest to this audience. First, responsible operations. Responsible operations call is for sustained engagement with human biases manifested in training data, machine learning models, and outputs. Among his recommendations, Padilla suggests developing a range of approaches to auditing data science, machine learning, and AI approaches. Also, for example, to support transparency, explainability, and accountability, practitioners should evaluate terms and conditions associated with cloud-based, off-the-shelf machine learning and AI solutions. I think Todd alluded to this at the beginning of our session. This is all the more important given current events. We must work together to exercise data science tools equitably and with the responsibility necessary to advance equity efforts within the field. Second, and focusing on the shared methods and data, it's critical that the community arrive at shared development and distribution models and methods. The library community requires interprofessional and interdisciplinary venues, publication outlets, and funding sources that will facilitate shared development, implementation, and assessment of algorithmic methods in the context of cultural heritage challenges, for example. Third, we must make machine actionable collections, or collections as data, a core activity of our profession. Padilla concludes that workflows anchored in this core activity will begin to show the potential of algorithmic methods to assist with processing collections at scale, alleviate concerns about sustainability by proving impact on core operations, and help smooth the path to integrating probabilistic data in a discovery system, a challenge that still vexes many libraries. And finally, we need to be careful not to risk pricing some institutions out of this conversation and progress. The report recommends various studies that could help inform data science resource assumptions, charting paths that are feasible for a wider range of institutions. This report is a bit of an agenda. It raises more questions than it answers, but it is meant to set out priorities for work in this new space. In many cases, libraries and content providers lack the adequate agency to advance these efforts, but the report emphasizes that we all have a role to play, and I sincerely hope that you will check out the report in more detail. A little closer to daily operational efforts, I wanted to use my remaining few minutes to talk about some of the day-to-day data provisioning that my own technical research team undertakes on a regular basis. As the agency for the largest bibliographic data network in the world, you can imagine that researchers often want to tap into various disciplinary niches that this bibliographic universe covers. Lots of organizations that you're probably familiar with have proven quite good at this provisioning, and I just wanted to point out a few of them. JSTOR, sort of a standard bearer, I think, in this space for data provisioning. The Library of Congress, of course, makes a lot of its data freely available for users to download and sometimes pay for. The British Library, they're I think, worth noting because at one point they were trying to figure out exactly who was using the data, and they thought it better to let people get the data directly from them than in some of the recesses of the web. The National Library of Scotland, I like to highlight them both for this really cool graphic and for the name that they use, the Data Foundry. OCLC, of course, makes a lot of its data sets available for download and use. And then we're all becoming more and more familiar these days with the properties from Wikimedia, primarily Wikidata, which is available for download as well. When I was getting these kinds of requests at OCLC, fielding these requests for OCLC research, I decided that I needed some sort of matrix to sort of govern these requests by. So this is just a look at the data provisioning consideration that I undertake. I've tried to genericize these with the one exception where I use an actual OCLC example, but the first is affiliation. Who is the requester? Are they completely unaffiliated with OCLC? Are they institutionally affiliated but not themselves a member, or are they actually a member library? The next question is the access. Since most of these requests come from people who are not subscribers to the tools provided by OCLC, we have to look at how the data that they're after could be accessed. Sometimes an application is capable of, or even sometimes WorldCat.org is capable. It might be an API or it might be proprietary tools. Which is sort of my euphemism for the brute force that so many of us undertake to do data provisioning. The third is the scope of the data request. Are they after training data? Are they after just counts of records and spreadsheets? Is it metadata? Is it full data? Or is it value-added data? Most of us, especially if we have a research arm, have our core set of data with some value-added data that might not be available in existing applications or the APIs that are already available. The one example where I'm using real OCLC terms here is the data source itself. So we know that we like to break down silos, but even at a single organization, there are sometimes silos of data. So I've separated out the examples here at OCLC. It might be a WorldCat request, an authority data request, something from the Virtual International Authority file, or one of OCLC's other properties. The fifth area I think is one of the most interesting because it's one of the ones that is the hardest to do, I think, for an organization. It's the value or the throttle that is put on the data that's being provided in the provisioning. And so we have to look at what's being provided, what portion of the data, the quantity of the data, the quality of the data, and the frequency with which it's made available. And then finally, the provisioning itself. Is this a one-time, one-off kind of thing? Is this something that I could reuse again and make downloadable? And the way it's provisioned, either through a license or some sort of click-through agreement. So assuming that some of these provisioning decisions are made by multiple bodies, I've highlighted a few areas that I think are worthy of shared effort in data provisioning. We know that there are standards around organizational affiliation, institution identifiers, things like that. We know that there are best practices even amongst proprietary APIs. Training data, I think, is something that could use some groupthink in terms of what's being provided to sort of train the machine learning systems that are being built. That value proposition of how much data. And then finally, and I think Todd also alluded to this earlier, some of the license terms that we sometimes put around these data sets are another important consideration as well. And that's all I have to share with you today. With that, I think I'm ready to turn things over to Tom.